Well, it was a solid speech that really retraced the landscape that he covered in his celebrated Davos speech in January. As I saw that before he came in, not only did all the members and senators rise to their feet, but so did the public galleries, and remarkably, even the press gallery, which never stands for anybody, all stood and clapped. So that goes to show that I think what one of the hosts of his speech last night to a think tank called the Lowy Institute in Sydney described as his rockstar stature.
Something extraordinary happened inside Australia's Parliament House in Canberra this week. Something that veteran political journalists say they have never seen before in their entire careers. When Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney walked into the chamber to deliver his address, every single person in that room rose to their feet. Every member of Parliament, every senator, the packed public galleries, and then, in a moment that stunned even the most cynical observers, the press gallery stood up too. Peter Hartcher, the political editor and international editor of two of Australia's most respected newspapers, the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, was inside that chamber. And he confirmed what the cameras could not fully capture. The press gallery in Australia never stands for anybody. They did not stand for presidents, they did not stand for kings, but they stood for Mark Carney. And they clapped. That is not normal. That is not protocol. That is the kind of reception you give to someone who has captured the imagination of a nation's elite. Someone who represents something bigger than a bilateral visit or a photo opportunity. Hartcher himself described Carney's status in Australia using a word that you almost never hear applied to a sitting head of government. He called him a rock star. And to put it in context, he said that the ticket to Carney's speech at the Lowy Institute in Sydney the night before was described as the hottest ticket in Sydney since the Bad Bunny concert the previous weekend. A prime minister drawing comparisons to a global pop star, that is the level of electricity Mark Carney brought to Australia. Now, to be fair, Hartcher was also honest about something. He said that if you stopped random people on the street in Martin Place in downtown Sydney and asked them who Mark Carney was, most would have no idea. But that is not where Carney's power lies. His power lies in the rooms that matter. In the world of business, politics, media, and the intellectual class, Carney is not just recognized, he is revered. And according to Hartcher, there are two very specific reasons for this. First, he stood up to Donald Trump. At a time when many world leaders were tripping over themselves to appease the most unpredictable and aggressive American president in modern history, Carney refused to bend the knee. He pushed back against Trump's threats of annexation, against the tariffs, against the bullying. And the Australians respect that deeply because they know what it feels like. Trump publicly humiliated Australia's former ambassador to Washington, Kevin Rudd, saying on camera that he did not like him.
You said bad?
Before I took this position, Mr. President.
I don't like you either. I don't, and I probably never.
Australia has been hit with its own wave of American tariffs and economic pressure. So when they see a leader from a similar country, a fellow Commonwealth nation, a fellow middle power, standing tall against Washington, it resonates on an almost visceral level. But the second reason is even more important. Carney is not just resisting, he is building. He is articulating a constructive, detailed, actionable alternative to the American-dominated world order. And that is what made his speech in Australia's parliament so significant. This was not some vague call for unity. This was a strategic blueprint, delivered with the precision of a former central banker who ran the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis, and then went on to lead the Bank of England. Carney came to Canberra with a concept he calls variable geometry. The idea that middle powers should form flexible coalitions tailored to specific challenges rather than relying on rigid Cold War-era alliances that no longer serve their interests. And he backed it up with hard numbers that should terrify anyone in Washington who thinks the rest of the world has no options. He told that packed chamber that if you combine the economies of Europe, Australia, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, you get a bloc with a larger GDP than the United States, 3 times the trade flow of China, the largest combined financial balance sheets on the planet, over 60 of the world's top universities, the largest source of cultural exports globally, That is not a weak coalition of desperate nations looking for scraps. That is an economic superpower in waiting, and Carney is positioning himself as the man who will help build it. But then he got specific with Australia, and this is where the visit moved from inspirational rhetoric to hard strategic reality. Carney and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese signed a series of agreements that could reshape the economic landscape of both nations. On critical minerals alone, the numbers are staggering. Canada and Australia together produce 1/3 of the world's lithium, 1/3 of global uranium, and 40% of the world's iron ore. They are building what Carney described as the largest mineral reserve held by trusted democratic nations. They have a combined war chest of $25 billion to fast-track mining projects around the world, and both countries rank as the top 2 most attractive mining investment jurisdictions on the planet. In an era where semiconductors, batteries, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence all depend on critical minerals, this is not just an economic partnership, this is a strategic weapon. And the two nations are choosing to wield it together rather than against each other. On defense, Carney revealed that Canada has just announced its first-ever defense industrial strategy, a plan to catalyze $500 billion in security investment over the next decade. Canada is already buying Australia's world-leading over-the-horizon radar system for use in the Arctic. They are exploring joint projects in drones, surveillance aircraft, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. And both countries reaffirmed their commitment to providing robust security guarantees for Ukraine when the war with Russia ends. Carney went further on artificial intelligence, arguing that sovereign AI infrastructure, including secure clouds, data centers, and homegrown large language models, is now a requirement for any nation that wants to remain truly independent. Canada, he noted, is the #1 global destination for master's and doctoral students and home to some of the world's most renowned AI research institutes. He announced new AI cooperation agreements with Australia, building on a trilateral initiative with India that was launched at the APEC summit. And then came the financial dimension, the area where Carney's personal expertise gives him perhaps the greatest credibility of any world leader alive. He pointed out that Canadian pension funds and Australian superannuation funds together control nearly $7 trillion in assets under management. $7 trillion. That makes them collectively one of the largest pools of investment capital on the planet. In a world where access to capital is increasingly being weaponized by great powers, where it matters enormously who owes whom and who owns what, this is a strategic asset of the highest order. And Carney announced that the two countries have agreed to modernize their bilateral tax and investment treaty to unlock even more cross-border investment. Perhaps the most ambitious element of Carney's vision was his push to build a bridge between the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European Union. Canada is already a member of both trading blocs. Australia is a member of the Pacific Partnership. If Carney succeeds in linking these two systems, it would create a trading zone of 1.5 billion people, grounded in common standards and shared democratic values. That is not a minor trade deal. That is the foundation of a new global economic order, one that does not depend on the whims of whoever occupies the White House. Even Carney's candor about Trump won him points. At the Lowy Institute the night before, when asked about his game plan for dealing with the American president, Carney laughed and then delivered a line that instantly became the most quoted phrase of the trip. Respect, he said, but not obsequiousness. He called Trump a very successful politician who had been elected twice, acknowledged that Trump was more direct and more willing to listen to different viewpoints in private than in public, and then added something that carried the weight of a warning. You cannot weaponize economic integration forever, he said, because eventually the rest of the world will simply find alternatives. And that is exactly what he came to Australia to do. The visit was part of a sweeping 10-day tour that had already taken Carney to India, where Prime Minister Modi told him that India was willing to buy whatever Canada was offering, and would next carry him to Japan. This is not a prime minister making courtesy calls. This is a leader on a mission to rewire the global economy while Washington is distracted by its own chaos. Canada's Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne captured the underlying truth of the visit perfectly when he told Hartcher that it had been 20 years since a Canadian Prime Minister addressed the Australian Parliament. 20 years. And the reason for that neglect, he said, was brutally simple. Both countries had been so obsessed with channeling their foreign affairs through Washington that they had forgotten about each other. That era is now over. Not because of some grand act of visionary statecraft, but because Donald Trump's aggressive imperial presidency has forced the rest of the democratic world to wake up and realize that they need each other more than they need America's permission. Carney was welcomed in Canberra with a 19-gun salute and a military band playing "O Canada" outside Parliament House. He met with Albanese and Australia's full cabinet, a rare honor that signals the seriousness with which Canberra is treating this relationship. Nearly all 226 members of Parliament and senators were present for his speech. Even Australia's opposition leader, Angus Taylor, who happens to be a close personal friend of Carney's from their days at Oxford, praised him as a man of the highest caliber and called for deeper cooperation between the two nations. When both sides of Australian politics are applauding you, when the press gallery is on its feet, when your speech is being compared to a rock concert, something has fundamentally shifted. Mark Carney did not just visit Australia. He showed the world that the age of middle-power diplomacy has arrived, and that the nations willing to trust each other and act with speed and purpose will be the ones who write the rules of the century ahead. Washington may not be paying attention yet, but it should be.